refer to those resources first. Also, please make sure that your Zoom name that shows up in the meeting is the same as your name that you enroll under so that we can take attendance correctly. Another reminder is that by the end of this week, everybody will need to commit to the action research team they'd like to stay in for the quarter, and then attend that action research team for the rest of the quarter. And if you're enrolled through my UCSC to section 1D, we are still working with the registrar to switch you out, so thank you for your patience. Lastly, if you're comfortable, please turn on your camera, but for any reason, if you would like to have your camera off, that's totally fine, but if you're comfortable with it, please have your camera on.
A little bit more on the reminders. Just to clarify some emailing stuffs. So in the syllabus, we have listed all this information that you're seeing on your screen of who to email for what. I know it can get a little confusing because ESLP is a group of students, so there's different emails that should go to different types of people. So to email the ESLP email, you would email us any class questions as long as general questions. If there's something that's correlating with your action research team, make sure you put UCC the facilitators, whoever your facilitators are. That information is also in the syllabus. And so also for the Acosphere email, you would only email that full Acosphere 2020/group for any issues or conflicts with facilitators, or if there's something that you don't want to reach out to the entire ESLP team, you want to do something privately, that's totally fine. Then also we have a faculty sponsor, Sue Carter. You would email Sue Carter and CC ESLP and her assistant Ashton, which is this AK email. You would only email that group for anything with withdrawing from the course, or if you need to take medical leave at any point in this quarter. It's really important though that you only email if you need DRC accommodation. You would only email Ashton, which is that AK email, and to Sue, so that all the ESLP team doesn't get your information because it's your private information. So along with that, if you want to email those to your facilitator so that they're aware, that's awesome, but just don't email it to the entire ESLP email. And if there's any questions on that, let us know.
Lastly, some quick announcements. So if you would like to volunteer with ESLP, we always have space for new faces. So on that little poster, you can see a little description and some of the skills you can work on or improve as a member of ESLP. So if you like what we do, please shoot us an email at eslp@ucsc.edu for more information about that. Tomorrow, from 5 to 6:30, there's going to be a Zoom Level Up workshop. And it's basically a workshop on how to hone your skills with online organizing and communication. So we can send out that link for the RSVP if you're interested. Lastly, kind of related to the point about having our cameras on, also if you're comfortable with it and you can, feel free to go outside and watch the class from somewhere with fresh air, especially in these trippy times.
Cool, thank you. So for the rest of we're gonna take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're gonna jump into the presentation. So we'll see y'all in 5 minutes.
So now we will introduce our speaker, Ildiko Polony, the founder of Wildfires to Wildflowers and the executive director of Sutro Stewards. Ildiko is a consultant on land stewardship for habitat restoration and biodiversity. Born in Oakland, California, Ildiko has been a lifelong environmentalist. She focused most of her energy on advocacy for action on climate change until she started gardening in her San Francisco backyard and discovered local wildlife. Asking herself the question, how can I foster the birds, bees, butterflies, and surprisingly diverse wildlife I see? The answer came in planting locally adapted California native plants. She quickly became a native plant and habitat restoration enthusiast. So welcome to Ildiko.
Ildiko, I think you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah?
thank you.
Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm excited to give this presentation. It's been a lot of sort of thinking and troubleshooting about technology, as you can see already, and also how can I possibly do something that feels engaging and inspiring under the context of a virtual experience. So bear with me. Thanks for being here. My name's Ildiko Polony. I'm the founder of Wildfires to Wildflowers, Restoring California Lands for Climate Stability, and the executive director of Sutro Stewards. And today I'll be going into, I'm going to try to contextualize everything in this moment, like that we're all sheltered in place and undergoing a global pandemic, and life as we know it has been drastically altered. I can say that I've been thinking about that for a long time, like since 2006 when I saw An Inconvenient Truth. I've been thinking about life as we know it changing in my lifetime. There's a lot of talk about future generations, or there has been, without any recognition that actually the generations are here right now on this planet. And I always thought about this, my life as I know it changing, happening under the context of climate change and climate disasters, but here we are, a global pandemic, and it's happening. So I want to acknowledge that. And I'll be talking about connection to nature. I'll be talking about habitat restoration, the potential for habitat restoration to mitigate the effects of climate change and also sequester carbon, and what that means in this moment too, as life as we know it is different. So you can go to the next slide now. Yeah. I'll just kind of say how it's made me feel. Like the first week of shelter in place, I think I was kind of on an adrenaline high. I was like, oh my God, like who knows what's happening? It's so uncertain. You know, I was scared. I was kind of freaked out, but I was also feeling inspired. Like things were happening that I'd been dreaming about, like talking about housing the homeless and talking about releasing, low offending prisoners, and the air is clean and wildlife is coming back in places where they haven't been seen in years because humans are finally giving them some space. And I thought, wow, this is unprecedented. How can we take this moment and the things that are really beautiful about this moment and translate them into the future and have it be something where we don't go back to business as usual, like actually make this a time of reckoning with ourselves personally and with ourselves as a global society to figure out what is it that we want to do better and how can we do this better, and actually we're making drastic changes like that, and it's inspiring. So I had this inspired kick, and then I had like a wah, 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 like a deflation period of sort of depression, and now I think I'm finding like a kind of homeostasis where I'm feeling in my day-to-day okay with it all. Not okay with it all, but where I'm able to kind of keep an even keel, which feels good. So right now I'll just invite people to enter into the chat, maybe anything that has felt surprisingly good about this moment. Maybe it's time to yourself, time to reflect, time to journal, time to do things you didn't have time to do. Maybe you have, no less time or more time than you did before because you're in classes. So maybe that's not what it is, but anything that has felt good about this period, and then maybe something that has been really, really hard, or one or the other. So yeah, you guys could just start entering some things into the chat. So somebody's saying reaching out to old friends, painting. Yeah, I did some painting yesterday. last night. It was really nice. Gardening, sewing, more time with direct family. Feels good to be in isolation because I like my space and me time. Yeah, there's a meme that went out. It was like extroverts, when they hear about shelter in place, they're like, oh, and introverts are like, yay. So less transportation time, no FOMO. That's good. Starting new crafts, reconnecting with my family, a stronger feeling of solidarity. That's one that I've been feeling a lot is, even though people are kind of avoiding each other when they walk down the street to keep the 6 feet of physical distancing, I'm also aware that when I'm walking down the street, almost everyone I'm passing are my direct neighbors. And I've met my neighbor next door who I hadn't talked to before. And I'm like having, physical distancing happy hour with my neighbor on the other side of the fence. And so there's a neighborly thing that's happening that feels really good too. So yeah, you can kind of, the other thing that feels really good is to have the time to connect to nature. So I've been spending a lot more time in my backyard, and I'm really lucky to have a backyard. But this connection to nature is something that we need desperately right now. So you could go to the next slide. And, we talk about connecting to nature a lot. We talk about it a lot. I hear those words a lot. In the environmental community, which is what I'm a part of, I hear connecting to nature a lot, but we don't oftentimes break down what that actually means. Like, how do we connect to nature, and how can we encourage others to connect to nature by doing what? So since this is a theme that's going to go throughout the presentation, I thought it would be a good moment to go into breakout rooms with the question being, how do I connect to nature personally? And then taking it global, cultural, societal, how can we as a human family connect to nature in a way that is more harmonious and less destructive? So you could say that bulldozing nature is interacting with nature, right? It's maybe not connecting, but it is interacting. And what are ways that we can take our personal means of connecting to nature that actually feel rejuvenating and good, and take that more broadly, so that our impact is positive as a species, or more positive. So I would say we'll do like about 7 minutes in the breakout rooms, and then the idea would be to come back and share. Take maybe 2, depending on what time it is, we'll take 1 to 3 share outs with the group on both your personal themes and the personal connection to nature from your breakout group, and then maybe something that you guys came up with as a way that we can connect to nature as a society, ways that we can interact with nature that's going to be more harmonious. Okay. Let's see, where are we? Can you skip to the next slide? Okay, cool. So now let's just do a little share out, maybe 1 to 2 groups, like what themes came up, or as far as the ways that people connect to nature, maybe how you feel when you're connected to nature, and then how you can imagine taking your individual experience and like translating that to a broader societal approach. So if anybody wants to share, go off mute, talk to the group, that would be really great.
I can share. Uh-oh, I have feedback. Okay, sorry about that, you guys. Can you hear me now? So my group and I talked about how we both really like to plant and garden in our backyards, and how a really cool way to bring that to a larger scale would be to implement more community gardens in our cities. And another one of my group members was talking about how she learned about this after school program that provided like a safe space for kids who needed extra care in the afternoons and the evenings. And they could go to this garden, and it was a similar thing, kind of like a community garden, and they could bring this like fresh produce back to their families. And I thought that was a really amazing, cool way to connect to nature.
Thank you for that.
I'm from group 7, and our group talked about how nature makes people feel more calm. For me, when I'm in nature, I like to go on hikes, and it makes me look at the bigger picture rather than being so focused on my life. Life isn't all about like academics, but I appreciate like my surroundings more.
Thank you. That's nice. Maybe we can do one more share. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I could go. Our group talks about like community gardens and like just community building like through gardening and like learning with through each other. And then also we talked about I guess sustainable and like educational practices like for children and like exposing them to nature at a young age and like that helping like with so many different things like in your body like allergies, like health, mental health, other things too.
Cool. Yeah. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah, cool. Marlene from our group also she said that when she's connected to nature, she realizes how small I am and how nature defines my life rather than the other way around, which I thought was really beautiful. And then also, so I asked to kind of elaborate, like, what does it mean to have nature define your life rather the other way around? And she wrote in the chat, that as we live in a capitalist society, I feel that we get used to consuming and not respecting. For instance, when I go hiking, I often want to cut a flower and take it with me, but then remind myself that it would be better off as it is rather than taking it for it to die off later. To me, every plant has a life. And I also really agree with every plant has a soul, has a consciousness that you can feel and you can learn to connect with. It feels spiritual. So thanks for that, everyone. There's some really good ideas there. Now this slide right here that says from veggie gardening to edible natives. I'm just going to tell you a little more about that story that was referenced in my bio when Nicholas introduced me. And this is how I became a native plant fanatic. So I had been a climate activist for 5 or 6 years. And I was also going to school full time, and I was working as a waitress, and I was a professional modern dancer, and I was basically working myself into the ground. And I burnt out, and so I had to take a break. So I took a semester off, and I had a full spring semester and then the summer. So I had a big chunk of time, and I started gardening in my backyard. I started planting vegetables because that's what everybody talked about. Like, the way to reduce your carbon footprint was to eat local, which is true. It makes a lot of sense. So I started planting vegetables and spending time in my backyard. And growing up in Oakland, I didn't have a backyard. I, didn't have that much access to nature as a kid. So this was the first time I'd really done that. And I started to notice all of these bees and birds and butterflies and slugs and snails. And I was just flabbergasted by the amount of nature that I saw around me. And I thought, wow, I live in San Francisco. I've got this tiny backyard. It's the second most densely populated city in the nation. We've been doing 200 years of paving and polluting, and there's cars and concrete everywhere. And still, this nature is thriving. This is amazing. If this is here in spite of all of that, what can we do to actually help nature? And how do you help nature? And by nature, I mean the living things, right? The wildlife. And so I started Googling, and I discovered that it was by planting your local native plants, because these are the plants that have the relationships with the local wildlife. So talk about connected to nature, right? The plants and the animals and the insects and the birds and the bees are intimately connected through the process of evolution. So one animal's, we can give the example of the mission blue butterfly that has a very small range only in the northern San Francisco peninsula. So from the southern tip of San Bernardino Mountain to the southern tip of the Marin headlands, and this is maybe a 15-mile like flyover span. This butterfly is an endangered, federally listed endangered species, and it can only lay its eggs on 3 species of lupin, which is a flower, a wildflower. So there's about 35 species of lupin in the state of California. And if this butterfly doesn't have those 3 specific species, it can't lay its eggs. So that's just an example. You plant, that lupin, and this butterfly is now able to live. So that's one example of many about like the relationship between the plants and the animals and why it is so specific. And it is so specific because of the process of evolution and these ecological niches that form that animals take advantage of or plants take advantage of, and they do so together sometimes. So once I discovered that, I just became like, that was it. I was done for. I switched from planting native plants to planting, or from planting vegetables to planting all native plants. And I felt connected to nature in a way that I never had. And I also felt connected to place. Like I felt connected to my city, to my ecology, to the state of California, and to history too. So this image here of the, these are edible bulbs here. This is a bowl of bulbs, that flower. It's called blue dicks. I think that those are purple flowers, but they're called blue dicks. So those flowers come from these bulbs. These bulbs, native peoples in California harvested in such a way and managed the land in such a way to produce actually more of these bulbs. So absence the harvesting with the traditional way of harvesting these bulbs actually decline. So Marlene's comment in the chat of sometimes wanting to take a flower home is a really beautiful and like heartfelt and sincere desire to care for nature. But it is also possible for humans to interact with nature and take from nature in a way that facilitates nature's abundance. So what happens with these bulbs, you can kind of see them here. You can see bigger bulbs and smaller bulbs. The bigger bulbs are the mother bulbs. And each year when the plant is flowering, the mother bulb creates little bulblets around the base of the bulb, so little baby bulbs. And what native peoples would do, and they do still harvest in this way in some parts of California, is they'd have a digging stick and they would dig the bulbs, take out the mother bulbs and leave the little baby bulblets. And the mother bulbs can produce like between 8 and probably 12 little baby bulblets. And in harvesting the mother bulb, which is the bigger bulb, they would loosen the soil, create space for the little baby bulblets, and more plants would come the following year. So that, to me, the act of harvesting nature in those ways that facilitate nature's abundance is an example of humans not being inherently destructive. So the way that we're interacting with nature right now is a choice. I sort of grew up thinking that all humans do is bulldoze and destroy nature. Like that's the only way we know how to interact. But that's not actually true. And I guess another sort of distinction that I would want to make is when I talk about ecosystems, I'm specifically talking about native ecosystems that have evolved over thousands of years that humans can be a part of and have been a part of. And this is the case when we go and we look at indigenous land management. Is these are ways of interacting with the land that happened over geological time, so slow enough that the land could catch up. What we're doing now is we're moving too quickly. So nature cannot catch up. Nature does not have time to evolve, and we just are destroying. So that's sort of that's where I'm going there. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So what happened is after discovering how much I love native plants, I came from a climate activist background. And I was like, oh my God, but how can I put all of my energy into these beautiful native plants that I love so much, that are giving me so much joy, and redefining how I think about humans and how I think about myself and how I think about nature, if the climate under which these gorgeous native plants evolved is changing? Like, don't I have to work to solve the climate crisis before I devote myself to native plants? And I thought this way for a good, like, I don't know, 2 to 3 years. And it was a conflict. It was an internal conflict inside of me. And then I read this book called Grass, Soil, Hope that talks about how habitat restoration actually reignites larger cycles, like the water cycle, the carbon cycle, nutrient cycles, and that the very act of restoring land can, on a local scale, restore these cycles that are broken, and on a global scale, restore our broken carbon cycle. So the example that was given in this book was grasslands. So most of Western United States, at the prairies and all of California's grasslands were made up of perennial grasses. So perennial grasses are long-lived, up to 100 years, grasses that sequester carbon from the atmosphere and use it in their growth. So I'll just sort of back up a bit to the carbon cycle. As you all know, the global carbon cycle is broken, right? So we have 415 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere right now. And human civilization evolved with 275 parts per million in the atmosphere. So there has never been a time in human history when we've had this amount of carbon in the atmosphere, which is why we're seeing all of these extreme weather events, because of the warming that is caused. So our global carbon cycle is broken. What we have to do is we have to get the carbon out of the atmosphere and back into the soil and into the Earth's crusts and mantles. There's 4 major carbon sinks on the planet. There is the atmosphere, the hydrosphere, the lithosphere, and the pedosphere. So the atmosphere we all know about, that's the air. The hydrosphere are major bodies of water and the ocean. The lithosphere is the Earth's crusts and mantles. And the pedosphere is the soil. So the main way that carbon gets into the soil, these are the big sinks. We hear a lot about the forests, the rainforests. Plants sequester carbon and take them into their bodies and use them for their growth. So trees use the carbon to grow both up into the sky and down into the ground. The problem, or not the problem, but a sort of nuance to understand is that when a tree is cut down or burned down in fire, all of that carbon that went into its growth goes, not all of it, but a lot of it goes up into the atmosphere as it's burning or as it's decaying or whatever else. The really beautiful thing about grasses is that they grow much more below ground than they do above ground. And these are the perennial grasses that I'm talking about in particular. So the perennial grasses, like our California state grass is purple needle grass. Those grasses grow, say, 10 to 12 feet below the ground, but only about 2 feet above the ground. So if a fire comes through, you're only losing about 2 feet worth of carbon versus the hundreds of years that they've been, or 100 years that they've been sequestering carbon deep into the earth. So when I read this book and I learned about that, I was like, oh my God, both of my passions and the major problems come together in this beautiful synergy. Restoring habitat does actually lead towards more climate stability. So we can go to the next slide. So this is a picture of John Oliver, right? So kind of continuing my story, I then like full-heartedly threw myself into habitat restoration and native plants. And we can fast forward to the fall of 2018. Trump is president. He's pulled us out of the Paris Climate Accords, right? So the U.S. is no longer negotiating anything about climate change on a federal level. And Jerry Brown, then governor of California, Jerry Brown, held a global climate action summit in the fall of 2008. of 2018. At that same time, there were fires raging across Mendocino County, and I think also in Southern California, that were choking out the Bay Area, right? So we were all wearing masks, similar to now. And this Global Climate Action Summit is happening. Global leaders are coming. Jerry Brown is like, I'm passing an executive order that California needs to be carbon negative by the year 2046. So I read about this executive order and was like, oh my God, this is amazing. That's the direction we need to be going in. 2046 is maybe too far in advance, but at least we're talking about carbon negativity, meaning we are sequestering more carbon than we are emitting. So I read about this, and in the same article that I read about this in, the journalist was like, we don't have the technology to do this. We don't know how to sequester carbon at scale. There's no such way to do this. So this slide in front of you here with John Oliver is kind of illustrating the same thing. John Oliver was talking about the Green New Deal in this episode. And he's like, you know, we have a massive problem. There's a massive climate catastrophe. We have to sequester carbon. We have to. So he's like, we have to have, he's pointing to all of these different technological interventions that have to happen in order to solve the climate crisis. So he's like, clean air travel, eat less meat, public transportation, weatherizing homes. And then he says, and we have to sequester carbon. And when he says sequester carbon, this gray dome comes on the screen that maybe you can see in the bottom left-hand corner here of this image. And so that's like a direct air capture plant. Can you go to the next screen? So basically, John Oliver, nor anybody in the New York Times or the San Francisco Chronicle or the Los Angeles Times mentioned anything when they were covering about carbon sequestration in this executive order, anything about plants and photosynthesis and the fact that plants sequester carbon. So instead, we're getting these like technological ideas like direct air capture plants that sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Fantastic. But can you go to the next slide? Plants also sequester carbon for free, and they're beautiful, right? And they provide us a sense of ease and well-being and connect us to something greater than ourselves. And they provide habitat for pollinators. So if you've heard about the bee colony collapse disorder, restore habitat, and you're providing habitat for pollinators. Or the 6th great extinction that is being caused by humans right now, restore habitat, and we're providing habitat for these animals that are going to be going extinct. And then we're also sequestering carbon, and we're also mitigating some of the effects of climate change and extreme weather, which I can talk about a little bit more. Can you go to the next slide? So this is the other cool part. Like, I am, like, as I've been launching this Wildfires to Wildflowers, Restoring California Lands for Climate Stability, in response to this executive order that happened about 1.5 years ago, I'm also seeing that there is more talk about habitat restoration and connecting it to climate change.
Ildiko, your sound went out.
So, hello? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Is it all good? Yeah? Okay, thanks. Sorry, everybody. So I would say that California is poised to lead the way when it comes to climate policy, because we already are. So we have hit and surpassed our emission reduction targets ahead of schedule up until now, while growing the economy at the same time. California is the 5th largest economy. I don't know if that's still going to be the case once we get out of this pandemic. But we have huge power to influence. We have a more progressive government than I've seen in my lifetime. We have a relatively engaged and enlightened populace. And I can imagine, you know, Governor Jerry Brown, when he made this executive order, he did so in front of world leaders. So I can imagine everything has changed now that we're in this pandemic, but I can imagine a world where California puts massive investment into habitat restoration, we begin to sequester carbon at increasing rates. So we're lowering emissions by technological advances in renewable energies and driving less and all of this, but we're also sequestering carbon. So they both have to happen at the same time. And we're sequestering carbon mainly through habitat restoration, not making these big giant, gray machines. Like we don't need more big giant gray noise making machines. So I can imagine California has success and then the rest of the world begins to follow suit. That makes me really happy to think about. So now kind of bringing it back to where we're at currently, like I keep on saying California is the 5th largest economy. Who knows if that's true anymore or will be true 6 months from now. The economy is, last I heard, and this was Friday, so if anybody has other numbers, put them in the chat, but 16 million people had applied for unemployment. So 16 million people in the country have lost their jobs. Like, what is this going to mean? Emissions have gone way down. Like the oil market is crashing. Coal is crashing. Like there's a lot of positive things that have happened. But I would say now more than ever, we need something like a Green New Deal. And a Green New Deal must include habitat restoration in order to sequester carbon and also solve all these other major problems like bee colony collapse disorder, the 6th grade extinction, human connection, children's connection to nature. And as I said earlier, the first week of shelter in place, I was kind of on this like adrenaline kick and I was participating in all of these things. And one thing I participated in was a Green New Deal organizing call with the Sunrise Movement. And I was just wondering if anybody here in this class, because I know you all are awesome, is doing any work with Sunrise or around the Green New Deal. And if you are, if you would be willing to share what's happening these days with that. And especially in the context of this pandemic and economic collapse that we may be facing or are facing. So if anybody would like to, if anyone is participating in any organizing around the Green New Deal, I'm thinking particularly with the Sunrise Movement, but there might be another way that you're active in it. If you'd want to like maybe go off mute and tell people what you've been up to, what you know about it, what is maybe happening in this context of coronavirus, it would be really cool right now for you to go off mute and share with everyone. I wish I could see all your faces. Is there anybody who is working with the Sunrise Movement and the Green New Deal at all? In my head, I'm gonna count to 10. And if nobody like goes off mute and starts talking, then we'll just move on, okay? What is the Sunrise Movement? Good question. Okay. So the Sunrise Movement is, I think it started in the US, but I think it's global. It's a youth organizing campaign around the Green New Deal. So do you guys all know what the Green New Deal is? Yeah. I'll just do a really brief summary of what it is. It's a concept based on the New Deal that basically brought us out of the Depression in the 1930s. That is like massive government stimulus investment, and it's a green New Deal because the investment would be around green technologies and also lifting people out of poverty. And addressing social inequities. So it'd be addressing social inequities through government investment, particularly around green technologies and addressing the climate crisis. The Sunrise Movement is a youth movement. I think technically you're supposed to be under 35 to be in it. And it's all about basically lobbying for a Green New Deal here in this country. And calling out the urgency of this moment, that like something to scale has to happen. Like we can't continue with these piecemeal sort of, we'll let the market take care of it kind of ideas, that there has to be actual government leadership and investment in green technologies. So that's what the Sunrise Movement is doing. Okay, so we'll just keep going. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so I think I talked about restoration, habitat restoration, but here's just an image of like a before after picture of what can happen. So this is in Oakland. This is in the Diamond Heights neighborhood. It is Saucil Creek. So in most of our cities, this was news to me when I learned it, but most of our cities have whole watershed systems that have been culverted underground. So like if anybody knows San Francisco, Dolores Park, 18th Street, used to be, there's a creek that runs under 18th Street that went all the way to the bay that Spanish ships used to come up and dock and have their, like, dock at their missions up that creek. So these waterways still exist. They're in pipes underground, and habitat restoration can do things like daylight creeks, like you see this picture here. Can you go to the next slide? Okay, so I talked about the carbon cycle. This is just kind of to highlight again the 4 major carbon sinks: the atmosphere, the pedosphere, the lithosphere, and the hydrosphere. And the atmosphere and the hydrosphere are maxed out. As we know, there's way too much carbon in the atmosphere. There's also too much carbon in the hydrosphere, and it's beginning to acidify the ocean and actually off-gas carbon back into the atmosphere. The pedosphere is the soil, and that is depleted of carbon from the agricultural practice of tilling. So when you gardeners, hopefully you practice no-till gardening. So basically when you, the tilling, if you don't know, is you turn the soil over. So you dig down about a foot and you turn the soil over. And what that does is carbon that's been trapped in the soil is exposed to the air, it oxidizes, and it becomes CO2 into the atmosphere. So we started to see an uptick in atmospheric carbon with the advent of agriculture about 10,000 years ago. And then it's increased drastically, like the carbon level in the soil has decreased drastically since the quote unquote green revolution, which happened like in the 60s, and industrialization of agriculture. And carbon is a major nutrient that plants actually need in the soil. It forms something called humus, which creates a really beautiful soil structure for plants to grow in. And then the lithosphere, so the Earth's crusts and mantles, you can sort of see the coal, oil, gas, sediments, and sedimentary rock here in this image. That has been depleted of carbon through the burning of fossil fuels. And it takes a long time to get the carbon back into the lithosphere. And it happens through a process of decaying organic matter, plants and animals. Decay and then getting sort of trapped down there. So again, habitat restoration can restore carbon cycles locally. And then if we all do that on a massive scale all over the globe, we can restore the carbon cycle globally, especially as we're reducing emissions. Can you go to the next slide? So here's, these are just more examples of sort of ways to restore habitat. So in the bulb picture, sort of back towards the beginning, I showed I talked about traditional ecological knowledge and stewardship techniques, particular to harvesting bulbs. So fire was a major habitat management tool or stewardship tool that Native peoples used and continue to use in California. And you might know this already, but California has a natural burn regime. And when I use the word natural, I'm not talking non-human, because I see humans as being part of nature. I see us as a natural element of nature. So Native peoples would burn the land depending on the ecosystem and depending on the needs that they had of the ecosystem. They would burn the land on intervals between 2 and 20 years. And And what happens when you do low frequency or high frequency, low heat burning is you're burning the fuel load on the forest floor, in this case the forest floor, so that when a fire does come through, there isn't all of the height from the ground to the canopy of the trees to burn, to then reach the canopy of the trees, to then kill those older trees. So it keeps old mature trees intact, doing all their beautiful carbon sequestration and providing habitat, and it burns through brush and dead matter, dead plant matter. So fire is actually really healthy, and that's another reason. That's one of the reasons why this campaign is called Wildfires to Wildflowers. So somebody did an internship with the U.S. Forest Service involving fuel reduction, doing just this, clearing out brush and making burn piles to prevent larger fires from happening. Yeah, that's really amazing. Thanks for sharing, Erica. So it's, you know, as we're thinking about connecting to nature, it's also connecting to the forces of nature in a different way. So we have had, in the Western United States especially, a you know, phobia of fire, and seen it as something that needed to be contained and controlled and couldn't happen, like at all costs. But actually fire, when respected and engaged with responsibly, is really healthy, and we really need it. And you know, like an example of what fire does is fire clears out the underbrush. It keeps the larger, mature, healthy trees. And by clearing out the underbrush, say close to a stream, it actually results in stream and water flow increasing, because there aren't as many plants right by the bank drawing water up from the soil. And so more water then seeps into the creek bed, which can increase the habitat for fish. So salmons have a better time when we're doing a regular burn frequency, like prescribed burning on the land, which means that, you know, the bears upstream have their food source. And so it all cascades. Like the ocean is connected to the Sierras through the salmon that do their salmon runs back up to the Sierras to spawn. And when we do fire, we are restoring those techniques that were used for thousands of years by native peoples, that restores the landscape, that then can bring those salmon up to the bears in the Sierra Nevada. So it's all connected, and it all cascades. So that's one thing that I find to be really inspiring and beautiful, is how humans can intervene in these ways. And I should say steward, because that's really what it is. We're caring for the land, and then we can watch the abundance cascade from there, because the plants and the animals have all of these relationships that then does that on their own. but with our involvement, which is great. Again, we're not inherently destructive. We can actually have a positive impact on the land. Okay, so the next slide is just another example of habitat restoration that's happening. I'm sorry, it's so Bay Area focused. I know you're all in Santa Cruz, but this is South Bay salt pond restoration. So wetlands are really important for carbon sequestration. So I can say that all plants sequester carbon. Some plants sequester carbon at higher rates and store them underground at higher rates than others. And then all ecosystems sequester carbon. Some sequester carbon at higher rates than others. So in California, the two systems that sequester carbon at the highest, sequester and store, which is what we really need, store carbon at the highest rates, are our eelgrass meadows, like along the coastline, and then our wetlands. And I don't know the mechanics of that exactly, like why these systems sequester and store carbon at higher rates than others. But other things that wetlands do is they protect against storm surge. They act as a buffer and a sponge. So they slow, because of all the vegetation and the slow incline of a wetland from the sea to the higher plains, they slow the storm surge gets slowed down. And it also helps protect against sea level rise. And wetlands filter water. runoff from the land. The plants filter the water before it goes into the ocean. So there's all these services, they call them, that ecosystems do. Eelgrass meadows also prevent erosion, which helps with sea level rise and storm surge. And I could talk more about that, but I do want to leave some time for questions. So if you could go to the next slide. So here's just some ideas of what you can do. You can plant your local native plants. So people were talking about connecting to nature by gardening. So I do gardening in my backyard. I'm in my backyard right now. I had all these fancy ideas about showing you plants as I was doing my presentation, but I just like got on a roll and didn't do that. But we can do that now. We have 20 more minutes, so I could show you some of these plants that I've been referring to. So you can plant your local native plants. You can use calflora.org to learn what plants grow in your area. You can plant them in your community garden, or maybe there's a place on campus where you can plant them. You can start native plant gardens on campus. There probably are some already. And then advocate for habitat restoration as part of Green New Deal legislation at the state and federal levels would be another major thing to do. Please follow Wildfires to Wildflowers on social media. There's all the info right there. And if you're excited about this, you can also email me. My email's on the next slide. And we have calls. So you can help out. Yeah, calflora.org. Somebody just posted that. Thank you. And then there's another website called CalScape that's put out by the California Native Plant Society that tells you, again, all about what grows in your area, and it has really cool information on like the habitat value of the different plants. So oak trees, for example, host over 40 different species of butterflies and moths, and that's just one tree that does that. And by host, I mean that's the plant that the butterfly lays its eggs on. So 40 different species of butterflies and moths, and we're only talking about butterflies and moths, lays their egg on oak trees. So, you know, and then the butterflies and the moths, the insects, bring the birds, because mother birds and father birds need to feed caterpillars to their baby birds. Baby birds need caterpillars. And so in order to have birds, you need to have butterflies and moths to have caterpillars to feed the birds. So there's another example of it, just goes up and up from there. So if you could go to the last slide, there'll be my contact information on there. And thank you so much for listening. We have 20 minutes for questions, and also I'm all set up to show you some plants in my backyard if you're interested in that. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Ildiko. That was great. Yeah, we can move into the question and answer portion if the chat monitors.
I'm not sure how questions happen. Do you put them in the chat?
Yeah, we're gonna have some.
You want to see my plants? Okay.
We have chat monitors that have been taken care of.
I have a phone, which is I'm gonna have to go back to the meeting ID. What's the book I discussed earlier? Grass Soil Hope is the book. It's by somebody named Courtney White. Another book that's really, really amazing that everybody should read is called Tending the Wild. Excuse my cough. And that book is all about Native Californian land management. So that's where I learned the things about the bulbs and how Native peoples harvested bulbs in such a way that fostered their abundance. And I actually have some bulbs in my garden, so I can show you right now those bulbs. And if there's other questions, putting them in the chat, I think will be good. Just give me a minute while I get my phone going. Okay. can you stop sharing the screen? Okay, can everybody, is it working? This is my backyard. Okay. So I'll show you the bulbs. So these are bulbs growing. So bulbs look like grass. They're in the monocot family. So we have dicots and monocots. Monocot just means one stem like that. There's also bulbs in here. This right here is Yampa, and this is an edible native plant. This is actually, if you know the Lewis and Clark expedition, this is basically what saved them. It grows all over the western United States, like west of the Rockies. And the whole plant is edible, the leaves, the flowers, the roots. What I'm really excited about is learning how to use these plants in sustainable ways that foster their abundance, and then incorporating them into our regular meals. Like acorns are highly nutritious food source. They're gluten-free. They grow everywhere. Oak trees that acorns come from are sequester carbon at higher rates than other trees. That's been shown. So what if rather than planting almonds, we had like oak woodland savannas, and we harvested acorns, and we tended our oak forests in because we needed them instead of bulldozing them. And these are more bulbs here. I wish I could show you the actual bulbs, but the way to do it, you would harvest after these bulbs are going to produce flowers eventually, like probably any day now. And when the flowers are growing is when the little bulblets are forming. So you harvest the bulbs that are edible after the flowers have died. So after the flowers have set seed and they've dried up, then you dig up the bulbs. Another thing we have here is this is Salvia apiana. This is white sage. So this is the sage that Whole Foods sells as the smudge sticks. It's from Southern California, and it was used ceremoniously. It still is used ceremoniously by Native peoples. But if you're in Northern California, the best, what was used here, probably I would say like north of San Luis Obispo, is this plant over here, which is called California sage. And you might recognize this. This one is really common on the coast. It definitely grows in Santa Cruz. It smells amazing, and you could just cut off pieces like this and bundle it up and let it dry and burn it. Another one that is used in Northern California and in the mountains is incense cedar. So I'd encourage people to get to know the uses of these different plants, and if you do use smudge sticks to kind of clean the energy and bring a nice scent to your room, use the plants that are local to your area and harvest them in a sustainable and respectful way, thanking the plant, and don't buy them from Whole Foods. That's what I would say. Native to coastal California. Yes, this California sage is native to coastal California. It's called Artemisia californica. Here's something in bloom. This is yellow bush lupin. So I was talking about the mission blue butterfly, and that it has, what is no-till gardening and how is it different? Yeah, I'll answer that in just a second. So this lupin is in the family of plants that the mission blue butterfly needs, but this is not the correct species of lupin that butterfly needs to lay its eggs on. I have one more lupin here that's also blooming. So as you can see, my garden is not perfect. You don't have to have a perfect garden either. This is Camiso's lupin. So this is a lupin that grows in the sand dune species, and this is another species of lupin that the mission blue butterfly cannot use. So it needs that specificity. So no-till gardening, that question. So tilling is just the practice of turning the soil over. So there's this idea that that you have to, there's this idea that plants will do better if you rotate the soil. So you dig down like about a foot, and you dig down and you turn that soil over. And actually what that does is it exposes the carbon that's in the soil. It exposes the carbon to the air, and decreases the quality of the soil over time. So it's actually best to build the nutrients by keeping the soil as is and planting plants rotationally that will add nutrients to the soil. So there was a question about native plants that attract hummingbirds. I can talk about that. Here I have California fuchsia. Oops, let me turn the screen. This is California fuchsia. So this is, this makes red magenta flowers in the fall. These are its dried up seed pods. So you may know this already, but a lot of people don't, that flowers turn into seeds. So flowers are beautiful and they smell good in order to attract pollinators, insects that pollinate them. So here's yarrow, just to be talking about flowers. I'm going to talk about this. And once the insects come, the flowers will get pollinated, and then the little embryo of the seed in the flower will begin to mature and set seed. So what we're seeing here in this California fuchsia, which attracts hummingbirds, is the dried up seed pod from last year. Another plant that attracts hummingbirds is in the pot over here. It's called hummingbird sage. It doesn't look like much right now, but it smells absolutely fantastic, phenomenal. It's one of my favorite all-time smells. A good trick for smelling a plant is to do what I just did here, like rub it between your fingers and then smell your fingers. And this makes, in the spring, this makes magenta a stalk, like a tall stalk like this, a stalk of magenta flowers. So does anyone else have any questions? Should I just show you more? I'm not sure how much more time we have left. About 10 more minutes. This right here is yerba buena. This is a really amazing tea. It's in the mint family. It's what San Francisco was originally named after. So it was all over San Francisco. And one thing that's really cool about this plant is that you can snip a little bit like this. You can put this in the tea, just in hot water, boiling water. You could also put the tip of it in a little cup of cold water and let it sit for a few days, and it would form roots. So this plant reproduces via runners, that's what these are. These long tendrils are all runners. And so it will, in the ground, if it were running along the ground, it would create roots anywhere where it touched the soil. So it also does that if you put a cutting in a little cup of water. This is one of my favorite plants also. It has, like I said, a really great smell. Here it is here. Another one that's really amazing is mugwort. This is mugwort, Artemisia deglaciana. So this one, you can actually smoke this. You can dry it and cut it up and roll it into a cigarette. Oh, and there's a caterpillar on it. Do you see that, the yellow? So that's the kind of thing that birds like to feed to their babies. And I don't know what kind of caterpillar it is.
Looks like Ildiko is having a bit of technical difficulties, so we'll wait for her to come back. In the meantime, feel free to post more questions for her in the chat.
Hello? Can you all hear me? Hi. So I got kicked off of the phone version. Sorry about the barking dog. It's Yerba Buena. I'll type it in here. Yeah. Yerba Buena is the mint. Yeah, mugwort makes a good replacement for hops. Yarrow is another one that I was showing you, the Wildflowers. That can also be made into an ale, like an alcoholic beverage. There's a really good book called Gardening, Cooking, and Healing with Native Plants of California, and it has a lot of these plants and their uses. So also getting back to that idea of connecting to nature, I find connection to nature in learning about these plants and how I can use them, how I can interact with them. So it's not just like kind of passively looking and admiring, it's touching and smelling and tasting and growing. So someone's used yarrow to soak up blood after getting cuts. Yay, that's so cool. I've never actually done that, but I've heard about it. So the scientific name of yarrow is Achillea millefolium, and it's after Achilles' heel from that Greek myth, because it does have this blood clotting effect. And I'm going to type the name of the book. Is called Gardening, Cooking, and Healing with Native Plants, California, or something like that. Mosquito bites. I didn't know yarrow can be used for mosquito bites. Is that what Allison is saying? Yeah, cool. I didn't know that. Gum plant is another really good one that can be used for earaches. So California Native peoples ate over 300 different species of plants here, and the average Western diet is 30 species of plants. So, you know, when I think about like building a community garden and growing our own food, like there's a vast, diverse cuisine out there that we are missing. And I'm slowly beginning to like incorporate it into my diet here and there. Like I went out acorn collecting this past fall. What does the bulb taste like? So the blue dick bulb that was in the photos, those are the ones that I've eaten the most, and they have like a crunchy texture, kind of like a cross. They're kind of nutty, but also kind of potato-like. So one thing that I really enjoy about learning how to eat and use native plants is the taste of the plants. Oftentimes are reminiscent of something that I've eaten before, but is also completely new and unfamiliar. Like ostoberry is another. I'll just, because the phone's not working, I'm just gonna go get the plant. So this is ostoberry. This grows into a shrub like about as tall as me. I'm 5'3", and it produces in around June to August. It makes little plum-like fruits that taste to me like a cross between cucumbers and blueberries. So that's one that's really great. Yeah, I could say that the bulb tastes almost like a chestnut. Yeah. Where do you get the bulb seed from when first starting out? Such a good question. So our nursery at Sutro Stewards, we're going to start online sales, but that's here in San Francisco. So what I would do, you could go on that website, calscape.org, I think it is, and you can search, like they have different filters. So you can put in filters of your location, the kinds of plants you're wanting, and then they'll do a sort and they'll tell you the closest place where you can get those plants. You could also responsibly do seed collecting, and you would never want to take more than 5% from a plant and 5% of a population of that plant.
But if you're growing the seed to produce more of the plant, then I think it's a good thing to do. And you can learn more about seed collecting is like one of the most amazing experiences. I worked with a woman named Judith Lowry. I would also totally recommend her book. It's called Landscaping Ideas of Jays by Judith Lowry. And she had a theory that the reason why humans, like why we're such consumers, like, you know, why we like to shop so much is because it satisfies the urge to forage. So when I'm out seed collecting, I have that same, I have this like, I get this feeling of like the feeling of peace that you have when you're hiking, but also of like deep satisfaction of like, I don't know, taps into some sort of survival instinct. It's really amazing. So that's like another way to connect to nature. I had another thought about that, but I lost it. Does anyone have other questions? An article about the multitude of medicinal benefits of yarrow, plant magic. Plants don't require 6 feet distance. Yeah. And plants like to be talked to and interacted with. And I find that like as I learn more native plants and I learn more about them and I interact with them more when I encounter them, like on a trail or in my neighborhood, it's like meeting an old friend. And I like to tell them that they're doing a good job, and I like to tell them like to keep up the good work and continue multiplying, and it's like I give that love and then I feel it back. So that's, and I would say like maybe just to close, like, you know, as we're sheltered in place, and we're being, you know, all the state parks are closed to vehicles. We're being told we can't drive anywhere really, or we shouldn't be driving anywhere. Like, that there's ways to tune into the nature that's around you, like kind of like how I did years ago when I discovered native plants and by gardening in my backyard. And it's really about just sort of tuning in your senses. So maybe next time you go on a walk, don't wear earphones and listen to the birds. And we can hear birds so much more now, at least here in the city. I'm sure it's the same in Santa Cruz. Like I live by Geary Street, which is actually classified as a highway. And now I wake up in the morning and I do yoga in my backyard, and like I know what the hummingbird sounds like, I know what the little blackbird sounds like, I know what the jay sounds like, I know what the wild parrot sounds like, and I never could hear them before so yeah, so don't wear your earphones and listen to what's around you and like connect to nature in that way. Yeah, it's so peaceful. I haven't written a book, but I have articles on my website that I've written, and it's Wildfires to Wildflowers.org. I'll just actually send the link of the articles. But I do want to write a book soon, someday. I know it's yeah. So I'm just gonna send the link that's the media link, and it has videos and articles and other stuff that I've produced as part of Wildfires to Wildflowers, the stuff I've been talking about today. So yeah, it's 6:52. I think I'm supposed to say goodbye now. It's been really nice sharing this with you all, and I wish that we were in person, but we will be soon. And you know, hang in there. We're gonna, you know, we're gonna turn this into something more beautiful than what we had before, right? Let's do that. And by this I mean the pandemic. Okay. Bye everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that was awesome. Thank you so much to Ildiko for coming and speaking. That was amazing. And thank you to all of you for listening, you know. And we do have some reminders for next week. If we want to pull that up, or I can share my screen. Yeah, so next week we're going to be listening to Mark Lopez. And yeah, so there's going to be some midterm prompts coming up, so just stay tuned for that. And yeah, and there's a Google form where you can provide feedback for the speaker, and we're going to share it with the speaker, so that would be really cool if you could do that. And yeah, I think that's it. Thank you, everyone, again.